Hi everyone. In today's video, we're going to look at how to deploy Kubernetes locally on your development machine so that you can start playing around with the tools that Kubernetes gives you. One of the beauties of Kubernetes is that it scales really well from running on a local machine with very little amount of RAM and CPU all the way to scaling up to hundreds of thousands of machines and containers and all that. So the beauty of it is that because it's symmetric, because it's the exact same infrastructure that you're running locally on your machine, that's the same with the one running in your cloud data center or whatever, you have this sense of symmetry. So when you deploy your app and maybe it's behaving weirdly in production for whatever reason, you can replicate essentially your production environment on your local laptop, which is really cool. Another advantage that gives you is that imagine you had like multiple microservices running and you wanted to be able to debug and connect to all of them at the same time and all those kind of stuff. You can also use your local instance to do that. So there are two ways of getting Kubernetes installed locally on your machine. The first way is to use Docker. The second way is to use something called Minikube. So let's start with Docker. Let's say you wanted to you have Docker running already. I will try and put the links in the description on how to install Docker, which includes setting up your hypervisor, so enabling something like Hyper-V and all that, and finally installing Docker for desktop. But if not, you could use VirtualBox and use Docker Toolbox and so on and so forth. But once you have Docker running locally on your system, especially Docker for desktop, you can right click it, head over to settings, and once the settings comes up, you can see that there is a Kubernetes option here, and all you just simply need to do is click enable, apply and restart, and you're done. This approach of installing Kubernetes works really well. It's quite simple. It uses the existing Docker infrastructure you already have, so it has minimal clashing. However, it is not really a fully fledged version of Kubernetes. Is tweaked in a way, so things like ingress controller and ingresses don't really work as expected. So this is good if you already know what you're doing, but personally I prefer, if you're still new to Kubernetes, if you're still learning Kubernetes, it's better to use the other approach. Plus the fact that Docker for desktop isn't supported on lower version of Windows because of lack of Hyper-V. It's Hyper-V only, and if you have say Windows Home, for example, then you can't even do any of this. All right, so let's head over to the other way of installing Kubernetes. So the second way of doing it is to use something called Minikube. So what Minikube is essentially this. So you can come here, Minikube, okay, and okay, I think this is the same thing. And what Minikube is just a command line tool that you can use to create and configure clusters locally on your machine. It's lightweight and very quick. So yeah, let's head over to the best way to start. I think is to first download Minikube. So you can just go to github.com/Kubernetes/Minikube. Okay, so with Minikube, right, this is the page for Minikube. You can head over to releases, okay, and download the latest stable release, which is 1.7.2, and then you can come down here, download the particular executable for your operating system. So if you're on the Mac, you want the Darwin AMD 64. If you're on Windows, you want this Windows AMD 64, or if you prefer an installer, that's also fine as well. If you're on Linux, you could just get the Linux binaries and you add it to your path. That's what just needs to happen, because a lot of Kubernetes tools require you to add them to your path and all that. One quick trick I used, or one quick tip I used, is to create a tools folder, and inside the tools folder I created a Kubernetes folder. Then I added the Kubernetes path to my Windows path, so that's anytime I put any executable here, it automatically gets picked up by the command line. So let me show you an example. I've already downloaded the Minikube and put it in my path. So if you head back here to the particular folder, you see that there's Minikube here, so no need to go through that stress again. And this time all I just need to do, if I type Minikube, you will see that it's part of my CLI now. Okay, yeah, that's all we need. Really, we need the Minikube itself. Now, depending on the version of Windows you're running, so if you're running on Windows Home, then you would need VirtualBox. But if you're running on so you say VirtualBox, but if you're running on Windows Pro and above, you would just need Hyper-V. So here you would say turn Windows features, you search for turn Windows features on or off, and then it will, you know, bring up this menu with Hyper-V in it. So if you're running on Windows Home, then this option will not be here, then you'd have to go through the VirtualBox option. But if you're running on Windows 10 and above, sorry, if you're running on Pro and above, you see Hyper-V here. Then yeah, just enable Hyper-V and you're good to go. Yeah, so once Hyper-V is enabled, what that allows you to do is to come here and say Hyper-V manager, because the way both just because of the way it works, right, both Docker and Minikube create a Linux VM inside whatever hypervisor you have, and then they deploy the Kubernetes into that Linux VM and they're able to connect to it using SSH or whatever. So that's essentially how the architecture works for both Docker and Minikube. But because Docker and Minikube are essentially doing the same thing, right? If you're using Minikube, then you don't even need Docker to be running. So here I'll just quickly exit this, at least to save your system resources, because it takes like 2 gigs of memory, and if you have the two of them running, they will both take to 2 gigs of memory. So after quitting that, yes, that goes away. Yeah, I should have some, you know, free resources that I can use right away. So now let's head over to Minikube, right? The first thing we need to do is to first configure our virtual machine driver. So if you installed VirtualBox, then this is where you would your command would differ slightly. But for the rest of us who are using Hyper-V, then, you know, it's going to be the same thing. So the first thing we need to do is to come here and say Minikube config, right? This shows us the options we have for the configuration. The configuration we want to change is this VM driver. So we say Minikube VM driver Minikube set. Yeah, that allows us to change it, VM-driver, and we just put Hyper-V. Okay, so this allows us to change it to Minikube config set, config set VM driver Hyper-V. This allows us to change it to Hyper-V. If it's VirtualBox, you can say VirtualBox like this, and that would change it as well. Keep in mind that you can't have both Hyper-V and VirtualBox on the same machine. So the way hypervisors work, they actually tend to clash with each other. So it's either you take use one hypervisor and stick with that, or you know, you just have to pick one and stick with that one. All right, so let me change it back to Hyper-V. That's the first set of changes that we need to make. So if we say Minikube config, yeah, the second change that we need to set is this. So if you're using Hyper-V, is this Hyper-V virtual switch. What it does is it allows you to network your cluster, which will be inside a Linux VM, with the internet, so with the rest of your system. Let it use your system's network essentially. In order to do that, first of all, we need to set up a virtual switch. So if we head over to Hyper-V, and once we are inside Hyper-V, you should see this virtual switch manager, right? This is where we configure the networking of the network setup of the different virtual machines. As you can see, it comes with a default switch, so you can just use the default switch, but sometimes for some people this default switch doesn't really work. So in that case, we can just create a new virtual switch. Make sure it's an external virtual switch. Yeah, so with this I can just come here and say the name should be just external, right? I can give it some notes and say, okay, this allows the virtual machine to connect to external networks like the internet. Okay, and then you specify how it should connect to the external network. So for example, if you had multiple like network adapters in your system, then you could specify which network adapter it should latch onto. But I only have one, so therefore my wireless adapter, in that case I'm just connected to that. I go ahead and apply. It's going to tell me it's going to do some network disruption, which is fine. Just give it a moment. All right, so it's done now. We have the external virtual switch already configured, already created. So this is it here. External virtual switch is latched onto this Wi-Fi card. Then what we now need to do is in our configuration. So here we now need to specify that virtual Hyper-V virtual switch. To do that, we can just say Minikube config set Hyper-V virtual switch, and we now specify the name as external, right? That was the name we gave it, and yeah, we've configured it. Okay, good. So in order to confirm that all your configurations are correct, you could just say Minikube config view. This shows you what configurations you've set. As we can see, we set the virtual switch to external, we set the VM driver to Hyper-V. So once you're ready, you could just say Minikube start. And what this will do is it will first download the Minikube ISO and so on and so forth. Oh yeah, I forgot this. Yeah, this is a good thing. First of all, you need to, this is another way you can enable the Hyper-V. Like I said earlier, you could just run this command in PowerShell, but you need to run it in an elevated PowerShell. You can't just run Minikube commands in your default shell because you need administrator privileges to run it. If it was Linux, we could just simply say sudo and move on with our lives, but this is Windows, so that doesn't work. All right, let's create a new window. This time it's running as administrator, and here we can just say Minikube start. And what this will do is it will download the Minikube ISO and all that, and then they'll create a Hyper-V virtual machine and then configure it. So if you look here, you'll see that it's about to create one. Yes, it has created the Minikube virtual machine, and it will not only start it, but it will now deploy Kubernetes into the virtual machine. Let's just give it a moment while it's creating the virtual machine. All right, so yeah, Kubernetes has the Minikube has fully started. It has created the VM, configured Kubernetes, default storage class code, storage provisioner, and all that, and it has eventually configured Cube Ctl, Cube Ctx. So saying Cube Ctl.exe is version 1.15.5 and is incompatible with Cube Ctl 1.17.12. So that's another thing. In order for us to start using the cluster, we need Cube Ctl. So the next thing we need to do is to download Cube Ctl. So to get Cube Ctl, we can just come here and go to Google, search for download Cube Ctl, and then yeah, this just takes us to where we can download it. And yeah, this is essentially, we look for the one for Windows. Head over to Windows. So yeah, this is the link to download Cube Ctl for Windows. So we can copy this and put in the latest version. The version here was saying 1.17.2, so I can just change this to 1.17.2 and download the exe, which is cool. It's like I've downloaded it before, but let me do it again. I'm not so sure if that's the latest one. Yes, so now that we have Cube Ctl downloaded, we can open folder, copy the executable. So this is the executable, copy that, head over to our tools, Windows, tools, Kubernetes, and we come here and paste Cube Ctl. Yeah, so to test if we installed Cube Ctl correctly, we can just say Cube Ctl version, right? And it will tell us what version of Cube Ctl we're running. This is saying 1.15.5. let's see which Cube Ctl. Oh, the one in Docker. All right, I could remove that, so I just need to head over to cd c program files, docker resources, and then I can go to bin Cube Ctl bin, and I can look for, this is the Cube Ctl, so let's remove that. Don't really need it since we're going to get Cube Ctl manually. So now if I said Cube Ctl, Cube Ctl version, it should show that we are running, yes, 1.17.2, which is essentially the latest version of it. So to check that Minikube is well configured, we can just run Minikube status, and as you can see, the our local Kubernetes cluster is running correctly, and so on and so forth. The next thing we need is to be able to switch between different contexts. So for example, you may work in an organization where you're using Kubernetes, you have different clusters, some running in Google Cloud, some running in any other infrastructure, and you want to be able to connect to them as well as connect to the ones locally, so that your commands would be to the right cluster. In Kubernetes, you use the concept of contexts to do that, and to allow you to be able to easily switch context, you need to download this tool called Cube Ctl. So if you're on, if I can say kubectl.dev, if you're on Mac or you're using Bash, then on Linux you can just download Cube Ctl. It's just 2 files. The installation instructions are here. So if you are using Mac, you could just use Homebrew. If you're using Linux, it has some packages as well. But unfortunately for PowerShell and Windows people, there's nothing there. So for that one, head over to github.com/odytries, sorry, gists.github.com/odytries/Kubernetes. I'll put the links in the description as well. So yeah, I have a port of it, based on Kubernetes Win and Cube Ctl Win, but just copy these 2 files, right? Download them to your local system. Make sure you unlock them, because that's another thing that Windows does, is it tends to block downloads. So you can just right click the file if you create it, and there should be like a button here to say unlock or whatever. But if everything goes well, you can just copy the 2 of them. So that's both the kubernetes.ps1 and the kubectl.ps1. What this gives you is the ability to say Cube Ctl and Kubernetes. Okay, so to check whatever context you have, so you can say Cube Ctl ls. It shows you that there's I have quite a few clusters here, but this is the cluster we just created, the Minikube cluster, and that's the one we are in. And I could say Kubernetes ls, and this will show you that we're in the default namespace. Think of namespaces as essentially segments of your cluster. So you could have a cluster, running hundreds of containers, then you have different namespaces for the different applications that are running in your cluster. So once you're in a particular namespace, everything you deploy in that namespace is bounded by that namespace, with the exception of a few things which are bounded by the entire cluster. But yeah, we'll get into that later. But for now, we can see we are able to test that we have Minikube running. We're able to switch between contexts. So for example, if I wanted to switch to a different context, so I can say kubectl set cube, which is a cluster I have. Let me switch it back. So yeah, in this particular case, yeah, we've been able to switch it back to Minikube locally, where we have a we have a cluster running and we're able to test it. So I hope with this video you were able to learn something. Yeah, in the next video we're going to look at like deploying a simple microservices architecture on top of the local cluster we have, look at what tools we have for, you know, writing applications on locally on your machine and all that. So till next time, see you, bye.